1942, out in the South Pacific, a 12-year-old boy is loading shells into a 40mm anti-aircraft gun aboard the USS South Dakota, one of the most powerful battleships built at that time. His name is Calvin Graham. He faked his age, forged his documents, and lied his way into the United States Navy. He bled on that deck and earned the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart for what he did in battle. When he came home, his own government stripped every medal off his chest, threw him in a military prison, and handed him a dishonorable discharge. This is his story. Calvin Graham was born April 3, 1930, in small-town Canton, Texas. He was the youngest of 7 siblings in a poor farming family. His father died young, his mother remarried, and the man she married made home a place worth running from. By the time Calvin was 11, he and his older brother were already gone to a cheap rooming house in Houston, where Calvin kept himself alive, selling newspapers and running telegrams at night. That job meant headlines every single morning. He watched Hitler plow through Europe, one front page at a time. At the same time, he watched Japan push deeper into the Pacific. Years later, a reporter asked him why a boy his age would want to go to war. Calvin said, "I didn't like Hitler to start with. He reminded me of my stepfather." And on December 7th, 1941, Japan hit Pearl Harbor. Over 2,400 Americans were killed by the end of it, and many more wounded. Calvin read the headlines off his stack of newspapers, and his mind was already made up. He was going to enlist, and no piece of paper that said he was too young was going to stop him. He spent months preparing like it was the only mission that mattered. He shaved his face every morning, even though there was nothing there, convinced that shaving would push stubble through faster. He practiced a deeper voice until it stopped sounding forced. Calvin forged his mother's signature on the enlistment papers. Sources say, for the notary stamp, he and a friend walked into a hotel on their newspaper route. They called a fake fire up to the desk clerk, and while the man ran upstairs, they grabbed his seal off the counter. Finally, on August 15, 1942, Calvin put on his older brother's suit and fedora and walked into the Navy recruiting office in Houston. Here came a 5'2", 125-pound 12-year-old babyface and told them he was 17. Navy dentist looked in his mouth and saw what no documents could fake. "You have baby teeth," the dentist claimed. Calvin looked right back at him and said he knew the boys who just walked through and got approval weren't 17 either. Calvin Graham walked out of that office a United States Navy sailor. He went back home and told his mother he was going to visit relatives, but instead shipped out for 6 weeks of basic training in San Diego. Eager for action, he got assigned to the USS South Dakota. His station was at the 40mm anti-aircraft gun as a loader. His job was to keep shells moving into that gun as fast as the gunner could fire them. On October 26, 1942, at the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, the South Dakota's anti-aircraft batteries shot down at least 27 Japanese aircraft that day, while a Japanese bomb hit her forward 16-inch gun turret directly. And that was just the opening act for Calvin. In November of 1942, the South Dakota was ordered to Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal in the fall of 1942 was the most strategic piece in the entire Pacific War. Japan needed Henderson Field, the airstrip on that island, to control the sea lanes and cut off Allied supply across the South Pacific, and they weren't planning to give it up easily. The Japanese sent a powerful naval force to retake it once and for all. Admiral Halsey looked at what he had left to stop them and made the only call he had. 2 battleships. He sent them both. The USS Washington and the USS South Dakota sailed into Iron Bottom Sound, a stretch of water that already had that name because of every ship sitting on the bottom of it. What happened that night was close to hell. The South Dakota came under fire from multiple Japanese warships simultaneously and took 42 direct hits in a single engagement. Calvin was moving across the deck carrying a message to an officer when an explosion sent him flying. Shrapnel tore through his jaw. His front teeth were gone. Bleeding, jaw shattered, barely able to make a sound. He got up and remembered why he enlisted. He did not leave that deck until the sun came up. He pulled wounded soldiers out of the smoke. He kept ammunition moving to the guns that were still firing. And when he found men who were already dead, he took their belts off and tied them around the men who were still bleeding to keep them alive long enough to get help. He talked about that night years later, and he didn't dress it up. I took belts off the dead and made tourniquets for the living, gave them cigarettes, and encouraged them all through the night. It was a long night. It aged me. 38 men on the South Dakota were dead by morning, 60 more wounded. Japan never got Henderson Field. The naval battle of Guadalcanal was their last real attempt, and they failed. The Pacific War had a turning point, and the USS South Dakota was in the middle of it. The Navy awarded Calvin the Bronze Star for his valor in combat, and the Purple Heart for his wounds. He's the youngest decorated serviceman in the history of the United States military. After enduring hell, the South Dakota came home to Brooklyn in December 1942. Cameras were there to capture the heroes of the Pacific. Back in Texas, Calvin's mother was watching that newsreel footage when she recognized her son on the screen. She picked up a pen and wrote to the Navy. Around that same time, Calvin had traveled home to Texas without authorization and returned a day late, flagged AWOL. Both things landed on the Navy's desk at the same time. They didn't sit him down for a conversation. They put him in the brig at Naval Air Station Corpus Christi, Texas. The same institution that handed a 12-year-old a weapon and sent him into Iron Bottom Sound now had that same kid in a military prison cell. He sat there for nearly 3 months. When he managed to get word to his sister Pearl, Pearl told the Navy she was going to every newspaper in the country with the story. A child war hero, Bronze Star, Purple Heart, sitting in a cell. The Navy opened the door, and on April 1st, 1943, they handed Calvin a dishonorable discharge, stripped the Bronze Star, stripped the Purple Heart, and cut him off from any disability benefits permanently. As far as they were concerned, he was a 13-year-old kid. He walked out with just the clothes on his back and shrapnel still in his body. With no school to return to, he got work as a welder, married at 14, became a father at 15, and divorced at 17. When selective service came calling, he didn't wait to be drafted. He walked into the Marine Corps on his own terms and served from 1948 to 1951. He made corporal until a fall broke his back and ended his military career for good. He came back home and sold magazine subscriptions door to door to survive, and through all of it, for 30 years, he wrote letters to anyone who might listen, filed requests that went nowhere, refused to let a dishonorable discharge be the last word on what he did on the deck of the USS South Dakota. In 1976, he wrote directly to Jimmy Carter, a Navy man himself, and made his case in one line: "I deserved more than a deserter did." Senators Lloyd Benson and John Tower took up the fight in 1977. President Carter eventually signed the legislation in 1978. Honorable discharge restored, medals returned, all of them except the Purple Heart. Calvin kept going, and in 1988, CBS aired Too Young the Hero, and for the first time, the full story reached the entire country. President Reagan watched it, signed legislation that same year granting full disability benefits and back pay.
And these monies allocated to improve the health care of veterans will not be withdrawn simply because of unavoidable delays that prevented meeting of artificial deadlines set within the original legislation. We owe more than money to those who wore their country's uniform and sacrificed in our behalf, and we will not waver in our obligation to them. So I am particularly pleased to sign this bill, which represents a sound and productive program for helping American veterans and all the American people. And so saying, I'll sign it.
He never held his Purple Heart again. He told someone close to him, "Maybe they'll give me my Purple Heart after I'm gone." Calvin Leon Graham died at heart failure at age 62 in Fort Worth, Texas. Almost 2 years later, Secretary of the Navy John Dalton stood at the ceremony in Arlington, Texas, and handed the Purple Heart to Calvin's widow, Mary Graham, 52 years after the wounds that earned it. His gravestone at Laurel Land Memorial Park in Fort Worth, Texas, reads, "Too young the hero. He is not forgotten. We salute."